Hello guys and welcome to Imperator Rome. Whether you're finding this video as part of my guides playlist, which you can find in the description below, or this is your first guide you've ever watched from me, I will let you know that today we will be going over 10 tips that are extremely useful for new players to keep in mind while playing this game. These tips are not all-encompassing, so if you can think of any others new players should know, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And also, if you guys find this type of video helpful and you want to see more tips, feel free to let me know that in the comments as well. But for now, let's get into our first tip, which is going to be the map filters. Whether the new players be in my community or in the comments, these map filters I've seen generate a lot of confusion. This tip will be to make note of this little cogwheel right here, as this is how you configure your map modes. When you start up the game for the first time, your map modes is not gonna look the same as my map modes. This is because I've customized this. In fact, you'll barely have anything here. But all you need to do is click this little cogwheel right here and it will pull out this list. Focus on the actual button and not the actual selection here, because you can click and drag the button. You see there's a little indicator. Click, hold, and then once you move the mouse, you'll see you're dragging it. There's a little symbol, and you just plop it down into one of those slots, and that's how you get it there. It does not work if you try this with the selection, but the selection will allow you to activate map modes that are not here in your hotkeyed ones, so to say. I've seen many players think that the ability to fill these doesn't even exist, or that these other map modes don't exist. I also had one commenter think that it was a paid DLC to be able to do that. But no, in the base game, you will have access to these map modes. So that is tip number one. Tip number two, do your missions. If you look over here at missions, you'll see I have one such mission already selected. If I abort this mission, ignore that for the time being. You see, we'll have multiple missions that we can select. Whether you're playing the base game and only playing as Rome, Carthage, or a minor Greek nation, or you own DLCs that add more of these missions, or you're playing as a barbarian or even Macedon by default, who would by default without DLC only have access to the most generic of missions. These missions are worth doing. They may not always be worth doing when they become available, but they will probably be worth doing at some point. You get permanent bonuses from doing these, and I've even made an entire guide all about missions that you can find in the playlist below. But that's number two, do your missions. They are worth it, even the generic ones. Now, for number three, don't forget about trade in non-capital provinces. So we all theoretically might know what trade in a capital province looks like. You have a certain amount of trade routes, you can import to your capital, you can also automate that trade entirely, you can even manage it somewhat from the trade overview. But your capital province is not where all the trade happens. If I go, for example, over to this province, you'll see I have 4 trade routes here, and they are being used. I'm importing fish, wine, horses, and wood. Don't worry about why those would be picked, because I didn't pick them. There is an automatic trade button here that you can set per province. So every time you take over a new province, you can either make sure to start importing if you have trade routes, either manually or set it to automatic. And if you're not sure if you've missed any, you don't need to just go clicking around like, oh, have I missed any? Let me go check all of them. You can come over here to Nation Overview, Administration, and Provinces, and just scroll down, taking a glance. You'll see up in Tribalia, right here, where I barely have anything, I have not set automatic trade, and I spotted that real easily by looking at this list, which I can click, and now automatic trade is enabled. I can also see there's even more that I can set, and I can see some other useful information here, which is very good for keeping track of things. The next tip, number 4, commerce should be export basically always. And what I mean by that is if we look at the economy tab here, you'll see under commerce, I have it set to free trade. This is export value. It boosts it up. Otherwise, we have trading permits in the middle, which is just more capital import routes, and transaction taxation for import value boost. There are rare circumstances where boosting the value of your imports at the detriment of your exports could be worth it, and there are rare situations where capital import routes adding to could be worth it. I will leave that up to your judgment, or suggest that you check out my economy guide where I talk about that in depth. But generally speaking, if you're not sure what you're doing, and you're playing any at least semi-sizable country, including how small Rome actually starts, maybe the size of Samnium here, for example, then you should almost always have your commerce setting to free trade. It is basically just free money that you are generating if you select this option. And as you can see, commerce income versus tax income, this is just how it was back then. You make money via commerce, not via taxes, because there wasn't an income tax back then. It was not that simple. Next, keep corruption low. It will save you a lot of money and headache. Now, let's dive into what I mean about that. So you see, we pay wages here. These are to all of our characters. If you've played Crusader Kings, that's what this list is. It's a bunch of characters that we have hired into different positions that are getting paid money. Certain things can modify how much we pay, such as our size, and this is the amount that we're paying to all the characters combined. We could pay normal wages, reduced wages, and increased wages. Never, basically almost never, use reduced wages because it will add corruption. Other things will add corruption as well. For example, if I look at this disloyal character right here, I see I can give him free hands. This might be very tempting, and I see new players do this all the time. 20 loyalty, and he just gets a what looks like insignificant amount of corruption. It is not insignificant. Ways to reduce corruption in characters are very minor. We're talking 0.01 per month. Those are the increments which you can get reductions. Giving a 0.2 plus positive is hugely bad. And as we saw over in the economy, 0.25 to all characters with reduced wages. Doesn't matter what benefits this gives you. This is hugely detrimental because the more corrupt your characters are, the more money will disappear, the lower your income will go, the less loyal your provinces that they govern will be, and the more problems you're going to have in general, piling up and up and up and up and up. I've never seen a new player that started handing out free hands all the time, and I've seen this a lot, not run into a ton of issues. These things are here as tools to help manage things, but you have to determine whether or not the corruption is actually worth it. As a note, and I go over this more in my tech guide, to lower corruption, you're looking at the religious advances tree, generally down the center, things like this, minus 0.01, you see guilt by association. Yeah, that's what you're working with, and there's maybe a handful of these. So you will never be able to outpace what giving free hands would generate. So as a note, keep corruption low. It will make your nation fall apart if you let it pile up, and I'm not exaggerating. Number 6, don't overestimate legions. So there are 3 types generally of land forces in this game that I have gone over in depth in my military guide, but I'll give you a quick briefer. There are levies, which is generally the default you're going to be working with as most nations at the start of the game. Levies are forces raised only when you need them by the governors of the provinces with which they are coming from. Their unit makeup is determined by the culture of the province that they are coming from. You can raise them all at once or by specifically certain locations only. There are legions, which you need certain techs or advances or events to get to, that are permanent forces that are always on the map. I believe my legion right now is over here. You can customize what units go into this. It gives you a lot more control. It allows you to build roads more easily, and it comes with a price tag. What else comes with a price tag is a mercenary. There are mercenary units that are spread throughout the land, so you could find like this either through the mercenaries or just find them here. You could click here to try to hire them or try to hire them here. There are these 3 different types, and one thing I've seen is once newer players, in my experience, discover legions, they truly overestimate them. Maybe it comes down to a lot of these players have played CK3, where men-at-arms are literal superheroes, and 500 of them can take on 5,000 normal units. This is not the case here. It is way more realistic here, way better of a system if you ask me, and because of that, you should not overestimate what a legion should do. By default, if I have let's just imagine one cohort of heavy infantry in a legion, compare that to one that gets raised with a levy, and one that's in a mercenary stack. This cohort is entirely equal. One is not better than the other by default. Now, there are modifiers in tech and whatnot that I go over in other guides that can change this, and other things like that. But generally speaking, legions are going to be way more money spent than mercenaries only used in time of war, and levies don't cost anything to raise. They're essentially, financially, mostly free, but they do affect things like your research when they are raised. And if you go into levies, you can actually raise them and see base tax reduction, local manpower research. We went over tax is not actually that important, but it does lower other things. Levies and legions are dependent on your manpower, which is up here, and mercenaries just kind of generate their own. Unless you specifically go out of your way to use these little sub-menu options right here to drill your armies, for example, to give them a bunch of experience, they are not going to be notably better than a levy stack, other than the fact that you decided what went in there for yourself and made something a little more efficient. But it comes with a gigantic price tag, which will eat away into your budget, guaranteed. Not to mention the laws that allow you to use legions also reduce the total amount of cohorts that you could pull out of any province. So you have to think about it. Do you have enough money to justify getting less units than potentially drilling them, which is going to cost you even more money constantly to maintain their experience? Or would you rather have more levies, which, while they don't spawn with experience, they're a match for just about anyone? And so long as you assign decent military governors, then you don't have to worry about the leaders either. Do not overestimate legions. Do not underestimate levies. Mercenaries as well. They are good, and there are valid playstyles that center around each of these three, or a combination of. Number 7, automation for trade specifically. Now, this is something new players basically never seem to find by themselves, at least in my experience. If you go to trade overview, there's 2 buttons up here, accept all trades. If you click this, then any trade offer you get will be automatically accepted. Otherwise, they'd pop up here. And generally speaking, there is no difference if Carthage wants to buy my horses, for example, or if Rome wants to buy my horses. They're going to pay the same amount. The resource has a set value, and so long as you're exporting it to a foreign power, they will pay the same amount. You will only kind of lose out on money if you're, for example, just importing it from one of your own provinces to another one of your provinces. That's less efficient, but this won't do that. This will only cover foreign powers. And if you know enough about importing in your capital province, you might know, oh, well, I want to keep these bonuses though, so I don't want to export automatically. Well, that's fine. There's a button for that, block surplus. If you click this is checked. They will never export any resources that are required to maintain a capital surplus so that you may keep your nationwide bonuses through any imports or production that you have providing these resources in your capital province. And we just covered legions and some trading, so let's talk about number 8, importing resource goods for legions. You may not have access to everything when you want to make your legion. For example, I'm using, as Macedonia in this setup right here, the phalanx. The phalanx really benefits from having elephants. But as Macedonia, in Greece, and in everywhere I've expanded to on the map that we're looking at right now, I have not actually gotten access to elephants. I produce none. So how did I get these? Well, it's simple. You don't need those elephants to be in your nation as a production item by default. You can just import them. However, it doesn't exactly work nationwide. So I have the 2 elephants for the bonus here. I imported these from, say, Egypt, Carthage, places that have elephants. And now a legion that I pull out of specifically this location, this province, will have access to that. If I wanted to pull a legion later out of this province, I would have to import elephants directly to this province, only during the recruiting process. I don't have to maintain them to repair the elephants or anything. That's just automatic. Only when I actually buy the elephants do I need to have an import status of elephants, or just, production, some sort of way to bring the elephants there. This also works if you produce elephants, but you're trying to raise legions somewhere that doesn't produce elephants. You could just import from one of your own locations over to another of your locations in order to get access to, say, elephants. This also works with steppe horses and other things that lead to geographic, otherwise specific units that you can raise. Number 9, remember your stances. This is very, very, very important. If you right click on any nation, you'll get an our details at the bottom, whether you're right clicking on yourself or a foreign nation. This all applies to you. And one of these things is your stance. Your stance is very important. It takes a little bit of political influence to change, but there are 5 different stances. Neutral, which will give you some diplomatic relation slots. Appeasing, which gives you improved relation cost reductions, better relations with your allies and those within diplomatic range, and aggressive expansion decay in case you're coming out of a war. Mercantile, which gives national commerce income, big boost to money right here, much better opinion boost to those in range, and with a mercantile stance as well. Bellicose, which is great for reducing the impact of aggressive expansion, allowing you to fabricate claims faster and allowing you to take more things in one war, but it makes your neighbors and those in range of you not like you. And domineering, which can give you loyalty to subject states, allow you to integrate them faster, and make your subjects just like you more in general. These are very, very different stances that carry with them very, very different and massive bonuses that you will want to make sure that you set. Your use case is different. Mercantile, again, is great for generating money. Appeasing is great if you want to just make sure everybody is liking you. Domineering is great if you have a lot of subjects you're trying to keep together or integrate together. Bellicose is great for warmongering, and neutral is just great if you're trying to squeeze in one more diplomatic relation. But definitely and importantly, remember your stances. Set them. Change them when you need them. It's only 30 political influence, and in the long run, that is not a lot. So make sure that you keep on top of this. Now, number 10, macro. Don't micro. This can be applied to a lot of things, such as my earlier tip pointing out how to automate trade. Just automating, that's great macro instead of micro. If that's too much for you, automate it. Just RP it as that's your governor taking care of trade, But you don't need to go around also looking. You could just go to this little sheet that also allows you to very easily change governor policies and things like that. This also extends to military units. If you're coming from something like CK3, you might be used to having to micromanage every single little unit, be it, in this case, for example, a levy or a legion. Your amount of units will add up in the long run as the game goes on, and if you're a barbarian, it will start out probably pretty sizable. And in Paradox's, in my opinion, terrible combat system, there's a lot of click unit, right click, go there. Oh no, now the AI sees what you're doing and has stopped moving there, but it reset their timer, which means you can now go get them. But if you're not specifically watching this unit for that kind of thing, you won't see it in time unless you're pausing every day just to check in on everything as well. However, in this game, it's not that much of a problem. Compared to something like CK3 where you are in charge of every single unit and you have to micromanage all of it, you can automate. For example, right here, select objective. You could do this for land and naval units and select objectives, the most broad of which being independent operations. I go over all of these in depth in my military guide. But for example, if I put this on military operations and then there was an enemy unit here going this way, and then my unit said, okay, let's cut him off. Then he would see when the enemy decided, okay, I'm not going to go there anymore because I don't want to die. He would cancel going there and then start going towards the enemy directly all by himself. I've watched the AI do this. It's maybe beneficial to not always have units on forms of automation, but if you have a lot of units that you have to control and it's just too much for you, this is the perfect place to automate. Paradox games have notoriously clunky and non-intuitive military and combat systems, and this is one beautiful way that you can automate it instead of having to deal with what leads to a lot of complaints in other games. But this tip also extends to building. We have the macro builder. Rather than going to every individual settlement, not even province, to select buildings that you want to build, maybe you just say, okay, well, I, for example, want in my settlements a whole bunch of farms. I can now see everywhere that's green that can fit a farm right now. And I can just go start clicking all over the place, bot, 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 and just start making them. And we can see them all over here. And I can apply this to anything, including the building of naval ships. Let's say if I want a bunch of ships quick and dirty, there's a bunch of ways to actually go ahead and build these, but I can select the different locations myself. Or for example, if I have a navy, I can just build directly to the navy. Right here, this button. I hate the colors they use. It's so hard to tell. But I can build directly to the navy. There's a bunch of different tools in Imperator that allow you to skip over the micromanagement that is notorious for clogging down Paradox games. And funny enough, this is one of the only games they have that has a lot of these tools, especially primarily with the systems that we are looking at here. Certain games like Hearts of Iron 4 are designed to be macroed rather than microed, but this is not about that, this is about this. And this has been a nice full video. These are my top 10 tips for you that I hope help you in your playing of Imperator Rome. I've seen the game has been taking off with some newfound popularity recently. Again, if you want to see more guides, check out the playlist in the description below. If you have any tips of your own, please leave those in the comments to help other new players out. And let me know if you'd like to see any more videos like this going over important tips, and if you have anything that you would want me to include in those. So for now, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you on another one.